The gravel crunched under Ethan's tires as he pulled up to the remote cabin. The sun had dipped behind the towering evergreens, leaving only a sliver of light through the thick Oregon mist. He shut off the engine and exhaled. This was exactly what he needed. A week away from the noise, the deadlines, the constant hum of a life that never slowed down. Ethan stepped out, stretching his stiff limbs from the long drive. The air smelled of damp earth and pine, refreshing and unfamiliar compared to the smog-laced city he had left behind. He grabbed his bag from the trunk and made his way up the creaky wooden steps to the cabin's front door. The rental listing had promised isolation, a place where he could clear his mind. But as he reached for the doorknob, a strange sensation prickled at the back of his neck, a feeling of being watched. He turned sharply, scanning the dark tree line. Nothing, just the rustling of leaves in the wind. He shook off the unease and pushed open the door. The interior was simple, rustic, exactly as advertised. A stone fireplace, a worn-out couch, a wooden table with a single chair. He set his bag down and let out a breath. Maybe he'd finally get some peace. But the feeling of unease didn't leave. It sat heavy in his chest, like an invisible weight pressing down on him. He locked the door behind him, reassuring himself that it was just the unfamiliar setting messing with his head. He was alone, wasn't he? Then he heard it. A whisper. Soft, almost musical. Ethan spun around. His pulse pounded in his ears. The cabin was empty, wasn't it? Then, from the dimly lit corner, a figure emerged. A woman, but not like any woman he had ever seen before. Her skin shimmered a soft violet under the low light, almost like moonlight reflected off water. Her eyes, large, luminous, shifting between shades of blue and silver, locked onto his with an intensity that made his breath hitch. Her hair, cascading down her back in inky waves, seemed to have a life of its own, strands floating as if weightless. Ethan stumbled back, knocking into the wooden table. What? You've come back to me, she whispered, stepping closer. His mind raced. What are you talking about? Who are you? She tilted her head, as if studying him, then whispered, Ethan. His name on her lips sent a shiver down his spine. How do you know my name? Her gaze softened, and something unreadable flickered across her face. Relief? Longing? Pain? Because you are my mate. A cold chill ran through him. Mate? No, no, no. I just rented this place for a week. I don't even know you. She stepped closer, and suddenly, he felt it. A pull deep in his chest, a strange, unexplainable recognition that made his knees weak. He wanted to run, but at the same time, he couldn't look away. You don't remember, do you? She murmured, reaching out as if to touch his face. Ethan flinched back, his heart hammering. Remember what? She exhaled slowly. Who you really are. A beat of silence. Then, before Ethan could even process her words, the cabin window shattered. A burst of red light shot through the room, scorching the wooden floor just inches from them. Ethan barely had time to react before Selara grabbed his wrist and yanked him down. They found us, she breathed, her voice trembling. Who? Ethan shouted, ducking behind the overturned couch. Selara's eyes darkened. The ones who never wanted us to be together. Another blast rocked the cabin. Outside, shadowy figures in sleek black suits emerged from the trees, their eyes glowing an unnatural shade of gold. Ethan's world had just been turned upside down, and somehow, he had the sinking feeling that this was only the beginning. Ethan's breath came in short, panicked bursts as the wooden walls of the cabin splintered under the relentless blasts. The shadowy figures advanced, their glowing eyes locking onto the cabin like predators zeroing in on prey. Selara gripped his wrist tighter. Her skin was unnaturally cool, but there was an undeniable warmth in her touch. We have to move. Now. Ethan didn't have time to argue. He barely had time to think. Selara yanked him toward the back door, moving with an eerie grace, her steps silent despite the chaos around them. Ethan stumbled to keep up, his mind reeling. As soon as they burst through the back door, a sharp whirring sound cut through the air. A metallic drone-like creature hovered just feet above them, its sleek body pulsating with the same red energy that had blasted through the cabin. The thing emitted a low, vibrating hum that made Ethan's skull feel like it was going to split open. Selara moved faster than his eyes could track. In a blink, she raised her hand, and a pulse of violet energy shot from her palm. The drone convulsed midair before shattering into 1,000 metallic shards. Ethan gasped. What the hell? Selara didn't let him finish. She was already pulling him into the thick woods, weaving between towering trees as if she had memorized the terrain long ago. Ethan's lungs burned as he struggled to keep up. His body screamed at him to stop, to process, to understand what was happening, but he couldn't, because something deep inside him, something primal, was telling him that this was real. Who are they? He managed between ragged breaths. Selara didn't answer right away. She led him deeper into the forest, where the air felt heavier, charged with something he couldn't name. Finally, she slowed, her grip on his wrist loosening. They are hunters. They were sent to take me back. Ethan leaned against a tree, trying to steady himself. Back where? She hesitated, her glowing eyes searching his face. Home. The words sent a strange ache through his chest, like he should understand what she meant, but the answer was just out of reach. And where exactly is home? Selara glanced upward, past the tangled branches, to the dark sky. Not here. A cold shiver ran through him. So, you're saying you're actually not from this planet? Ethan swallowed hard. This had to be some insane dream, some stress-induced hallucination. But the memory of that drone, of the way Selara had destroyed it with nothing but a flick of her wrist, burned in his mind. He couldn't deny what he had seen. Before he could respond, the sound of snapping branches made them both freeze. Selara's posture stiffened. They're close. Ethan turned, expecting to see more of the golden-eyed pursuers, but what he saw instead made his blood run cold. A figure loomed in the darkness, nearly 7 feet tall, its body wrapped in a strange, reflective armor that seemed to shift and ripple like liquid metal. Its face was obscured by a sleek, featureless helmet, but its elongated fingers curled like claws. It spoke, but not in words. The sound vibrated inside Ethan's skull, a deep, resonating hum that made his teeth ache. Selara took a step forward, her entire body glowing faintly now. He does not remember. You have no claim over him. The figure's response came in the form of movement. One moment it was standing still, the next it was right in front of them. Ethan barely had time to react before the air around them rippled with energy. Selara threw up her hands, and a shimmering force field pulsed outward, pushing the armored being back. But it didn't stay down. It moved with inhuman speed, shifting through the trees like a shadow given form. Ethan's pulse pounded in his ears. His rational mind told him to run, but something else, something instinctual, told him to fight. The armored being lunged again, and without thinking, Ethan raised his hand. A shockwave of pure energy exploded from his palm, hurling the attacker backward. Selara's eyes widened. You're remembering. Ethan stared at his own hand, his fingers tingling with residual energy. What the hell am I? Ethan's chest heaved as he stared at his own hand, still crackling with residual energy. His mind screamed that this was impossible, but the proof was right in front of him. He had just unleashed something, something not human. Selara's eyes, wide with both shock and something that looked like relief, locked onto his. You are not just Ethan. You never were. He shook his head, backing away. No, I'm just a guy. A normal guy who rented a damn cabin. Selara took a careful step toward him. You feel it, don't you? The pull. The way your body reacts without thinking. It's in you, even if you don't remember yet. The armored figure groaned as it pulled itself up from where Ethan's blast had thrown it. The reflective surface of its armor shimmered like liquid, repairing itself in real time. It let out another sound. Not quite a growl, not quite a word, but something that sent an unnatural chill through Ethan's bones. Selara's fingers wrapped around his wrist. We can't stay here. If you can do that, they'll send more. Ethan didn't argue this time. They ran. The forest was endless, stretching like a maze of shadow and mist. Ethan's muscles burned, but somehow, he wasn't tiring as fast as he should have been. It was as if his body was adjusting, syncing with something buried deep inside him. The realization sent another wave of fear crashing over him. They ran until the sounds of pursuit faded behind them, until the trees opened up to reveal something Ethan hadn't expected. A structure, half buried in the earth, covered in moss and vines, but unmistakably metallic. It looked ancient, yet advanced. A door, shaped like an elongated hexagon, stood at the center, pulsing faintly with a deep blue light. Selara didn't hesitate. She placed her hand against the glowing surface, and the door reacted instantly, shifting, folding inward like liquid metal being drawn back. Ethan hesitated. Where the hell are we? She looked back at him. The place where it all started. Something deep inside Ethan stirred at her words. He swallowed hard and stepped inside. The air was colder here, humming with energy. The walls, made of the same metallic substance as the door, were covered in strange patterns, symbols that almost made sense to him, like words he should be able to read but couldn't quite grasp. The corridors stretched out in different directions, leading to places unknown. Selara led him forward, her pace quick but her movements cautious. This was our sanctuary. Before everything changed, Ethan's pulse pounded. Before what changed? Selara stopped in front of what looked like a control panel. With a wave of her hand, the surface lit up, revealing a transparent screen. Images flickered to life. Star systems, planets, a massive celestial map that spanned across the universe. And then, a familiar face. His own. Ethan's breath caught. But it wasn't exactly him. The version on the screen looked different, sharper, more intense, his eyes glowing with the same eerie light that had flashed in his own hand just moments ago. His stomach twisted. What is this? Selara's voice was soft. Proof. Ethan stepped back. No, this is insane. I have a life, a job, a past. She nodded. Yes, a past that was given to you, a life that was built to keep you hidden. The weight of her words pressed down on him. You're saying, I'm not human. You were never just human. Ethan's breathing grew shallow. Every instinct in his body told him to reject what she was saying. But deep down, he knew. He knew. The way his body reacted, the energy he had unleashed, the unexplainable pull he felt towards Selara, it all pointed to one thing. He wasn't who he thought he was. Selara reached out, brushing her fingers lightly against his. They took your memories. They sent you away. But they couldn't erase us. A shiver ran through him at her words. His mind screamed at him to deny it, but his heart, something deeper, something primal, whispered that it was true. Before he could respond, a sudden vibration shook the ground beneath them. The walls trembled, the blue lights flickering erratically. Selara's expression darkened. They found us. Ethan clenched his fists. He could feel it now, the power inside him, restless and waiting. And this time, he wasn't afraid. The ground beneath them rumbled, sending dust and loose debris trickling from the ceiling. The walls pulsed, as if the structure itself was alive and aware of the threat approaching. Ethan could feel it now, something waking up inside him, something that had been buried for far too long. Selara's grip tightened on his wrist. They won't stop this time. They won't just take me. They'll take you. Ethan's pulse pounded, but instead of fear, something else took root inside him. Determination. Then we don't let them. A sharp metallic screech echoed through the corridors, followed by the hiss of the entrance door being forced open. The temperature dropped, the air thick with an unnatural energy. Selara pulled him toward the center of the chamber, where the glowing star map continued to shift and pulse. Symbols flickered across its surface, moving too fast for Ethan to comprehend, yet somehow familiar. His gaze locked onto a set of glowing markings, ones that seemed to resonate deep within him. Selara followed his eyes and whispered, "It's your name." The words sent a shiver down his spine. Ethan barely had a second to react before a heavy thud echoed from the entrance. Then another. The armored figures had arrived. They moved with an eerie precision, their liquid metal armor shifting and adapting with every step. Their golden eyes burned through the darkness, scanning, searching. Selara exhaled sharply. They're not just hunters. They brought him. Ethan turned to her. Who? Before she could answer, the figures stepped aside, making way for a new presence. A towering being entered, its form radiating sheer power. Unlike the others, its armor was darker, its energy pulsing red rather than gold. When it spoke, the words didn't come through sound but directly into Ethan's mind. You've been gone a long time, Kale. Ethan flinched at the name. It felt foreign, yet it stirred something inside him, like an old melody half remembered. That's not my name. The being took another step forward. It was. Before you were rewritten. Selara moved in front of Ethan protectively. He doesn't belong to you. The figure tilted its head slightly. He belongs to us. The air vibrated with tension. The armored figures raised their weapons, sleek and humming with lethal energy. Ethan could feel the heat of Selara's power gathering at her fingertips. And then, without warning, the first blast came. Selara reacted instantly, deflecting the shot with a flick of her wrist, sending the red energy hurtling into the wall. The impact shook the entire structure. Ethan didn't think. He moved. His body acted on instinct, and suddenly, his hand was outstretched. Energy crackled along his arm, building into something massive, something raw. He released it. A shockwave erupted from his palm, slamming into the approaching soldiers and sending them flying backward. Sparks of blue light danced in the air, the sheer force of it shaking the entire chamber. The leader didn't flinch. He only smiled. You're waking up, Ethan panted, his heart racing, his limbs tingling with power he didn't understand. But there was no time to process it. More figures poured into the room, their weapons raised. Selara grabbed Ethan's hand. We can't win this fight. Not yet. He knew she was right. They were outnumbered, outmatched. And if these people, these things, had stolen his memories, had erased who he was, then there were answers he needed. Selara's fingers danced over the star map, and the symbols rearranged themselves in an instant. A section of the floor shifted, revealing a hidden passage leading into the depths of the structure. This way, she shouted. Ethan didn't hesitate. They plunged into the tunnel just as another blast shattered the walls behind them. The passage sealed itself the moment they passed through, leaving their pursuers on the other side. The tunnel stretched ahead, dimly lit by glowing blue veins embedded in the walls. The energy pulsed in rhythm with Ethan's own heartbeat, making him wonder if this place was more than just a structure. Selara kept moving, but Ethan grabbed her arm. Tell me the truth. Who am I really? She hesitated, then turned to face him fully. Her glowing eyes softened. You are Kale, a warrior of the Zythar. You were one of us. My mate. My protector. The words sent another ripple through his chest. Then why don't I remember any of this? She swallowed hard. Because they took your memories. They made you human. To hide you from what you were meant to be. Ethan took a step back, shaking his head. No, but he couldn't say it wasn't true. He could feel it now, the power in his veins, the pull towards Selara, the instinctive way he had fought. She reached out, her fingers brushing his. I have been waiting for you to come back to me. A lump formed in his throat. And if I don't? Her expression didn't waver. Then they will take you again. And this time, they won't let you escape. A deep rumble echoed through the tunnel. They were running out of time. Ethan exhaled and nodded. Then let's keep running. Selara gave him a small, knowing smile. For now. But you won't run forever. Because soon, you'll remember who you are. And somehow, Ethan knew she was right. The tunnel seemed endless, the glowing blue veins in the walls pulsing like a heartbeat, steady and rhythmic. Ethan's mind raced as he ran alongside Selara, her hand still gripping his as if afraid he might slip away again. His chest was tight, not just from exertion but from the weight of everything she had told him. He wasn't Ethan. He was Kale, a warrior, something more than human, and she was his mate. It didn't make sense, but somehow, deep inside, it did. Behind them, the muffled sounds of impact and energy blasts echoed through the sealed passage. They were buying time, but not much. Selara abruptly stopped in front of a circular chamber where the walls gleamed like liquid silver, reflecting distorted versions of their figures. A control panel emerged from the ground, its symbol shifting beneath Selara's fingertips. The chamber vibrated, a low hum filling the air. "What is this place?" Ethan asked, catching his breath. "A transporter," she said without looking at him. "It'll take us somewhere safe." A metallic clang rang out in the tunnel behind them. The pursuers were breaking through. Selara's glowing eyes snapped to his. "I need you to trust me." Ethan hesitated only for a moment before nodding. "I do." She pressed her palm flat against the panel, and the floor beneath them lit up, symbols spiraling outward like ripples on water. Then, everything shifted. A sensation like being pulled through a vacuum gripped Ethan's body, and in an instant, the chamber around them vanished. They reappeared on solid ground, staggering slightly from the sudden shift. The air was different here, crisp, filled with the scent of something unfamiliar yet strangely comforting. Ethan blinked, adjusting to the dim blue glow surrounding them. They stood in a vast underground cavern, its walls covered in intricate carvings, the symbols shifting like they were alive. Pools of glowing water lined the floor, casting eerie reflections on the ceiling. But what took Ethan's breath away was what stood at the center. A massive, obsidian-like structure, smooth and towering, its surface rippling as though made of liquid darkness. Symbols pulsed along its surface, responding to their presence. "What is that?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Selara stepped forward. "A memory core." She turned back to him. "Yours." Ethan's pulse quickened. "You mean, everything they took from me is in there?" She nodded. "Your past. Who you were before they erased you. Everything." Ethan swallowed hard. The idea of knowing, of remembering, sent equal waves of fear and longing through him. He had spent his life believing he was an ordinary man, renting a cabin, escaping city life. Now, he stood on the edge of something much bigger, something that could change everything he thought he knew about himself. Before he could move, a deep vibration shook the cavern. The liquid-like surface of the core trembled in response. "They're coming," Selara whispered. Ethan clenched his fists. He had a choice. He could keep running, or he could face the truth. He stepped forward. The moment his palm pressed against the surface, everything exploded. Memories surged into him like a tidal wave. Flashes of a life beyond Earth, battles fought among the stars, planets burning in the wake of war, the faces of his people looking to him for guidance. He saw Selara, not in a forest but on a world of silver and violet skies, her arms wrapped around him, whispering promises of forever. He saw himself, not as Ethan, but as Kale, the last of the Zythar's elite warriors, betrayed by his own kind and hidden away to protect something far greater than himself. And then, he saw why they had erased him. Not because he was dangerous, but because he was the only one who could stop them. Ethan, Kale, staggered back, gasping as the flood of memories settled. His body thrummed with power, no longer foreign, no longer confusing. This wasn't new. This was him. Selara watched him carefully, waiting. Her hands clenched as if afraid of his reaction. He looked at her, and for the first time, he truly knew her. "I remember," he said softly. Her breath hitched, and for the first time since he had met her, her tough exterior cracked. Relief and emotion flooded her face. "Kale." A loud crack shattered the moment. The pursuers had found them. Kale turned to face them, but this time, he wasn't confused. He wasn't scared. He knew exactly who he was, and he knew exactly what he had to do. The lead hunter stepped forward, eyes gleaming behind its helmet. "You remember, don't you?" Kale smiled, flexing his fingers as energy pulsed in his palms. "Yeah, and you're about to wish I didn't." With a single motion, he unleashed a shockwave that sent their enemies crashing backward. He moved without hesitation, striking, weaving through them with the ease of someone who had done this 1,000 times before. Selara was right beside him, her own energy crackling through the air as they fought together, side by side, just as they had before everything was taken from them. The battle was swift and brutal. The cavern trembled with each blast, and within minutes, it was over. The remaining enemies, those who hadn't been destroyed, vanished into the shadows, retreating. Kale exhaled, turning to Selara. "It's not over." She shook her head. "No, they'll send more." He nodded, determination settling into his bones. "Then we stop running." Selara studied him for a long moment, then smiled. "Welcome back." Kale looked around the cavern, at the remnants of the battle, at the memory core still pulsing softly behind him. He had spent years believing he was someone else, a man with no past, no purpose. But now, he remembered, and he wasn't going to let them take it from him again. With Selara at his side, he would finish what they started. Because this time, the fight wasn't just for survival. It was for freedom, and he would never forget who he was again.